systems. All right. So in regards to autism acceptance and education, there are four sort of areas that I want to talk about today. One is the parent perspective and what that means. The other is the educator perspective and what that means. And also a little bit about accommodations and a little bit about teeny bit around IEP sort of scenarios. And gosh, I'm really excited. I feel like I need like longer, but we're going to do this more often. All right. So in terms of the parent perspective, one of the things that I think is super important, and some of you have heard me say this before, or maybe I've said it in a different way, but I think we need to really continue talking about how the parent perspective impacts autism acceptance in your child's classroom, school, just in regards to your child navigating their school day. The parent perspective can make a difference. And that I think actually can shift things. It can also cause some tension, but it's all about our kids, right? So you are the parents and you are sending your children to school to be educated, and you have expectations, as I do, that the teachers are going to do what they're supposed to do and follow the IEP. So one of the things that I'm finding is really difficult is for parents to understand your perspective of what your child's school day should look like and how that can work for your child's benefit in terms of accepting that it may look different. And it's not just about sort of fitting them into blending in. I'm not saying your child has to have a big label that says, I am an autistic student. I'm not saying that we don't have to have inclusive services. I'm saying that from a parent perspective, we need to think about what is best for the individual child. So as a parent, in regards to you accepting the concept of this autism diagnosis and how it relates to your child's education, you have to consider different placements, right? And I know that this push for inclusion and everyone in the state, just this whatever gen ed, I don't know what's going on in gen ed that's so exciting, but pushing for that gen ed. And I do understand the parent perspective of, I want my child to have the same opportunities. I want my child to be included. But we have to remember, what does your child need, right, in the educational setting? Do they need a small group setting, or do they need accommodations just in a large group setting? And that's where we need to start as parents. And I do understand it can be difficult. I do understand that there can be stigma around placement, special education classroom, or going to a special school. However, it's not about us, right? And how it feels, and putting children in a classroom setting that doesn't meet their needs doesn't help them, right? It just doesn't help them in the long run. So we have to think from a parent perspective, this is what I want for my child as a parent, but what does my child need and how do I balance that? Of course, that sounds really easy, right? Because, everyone has the same availability for resources and placement and different things, but that's not the case. So I do understand that we have to make decisions based on what's available. However, things that are available in other places are not available in some places because of resources, but sometimes because nobody asked for it. And I'm, the reason I'm sort of starting with the parent perspective is because I fully believe parents can set the tone. Doesn't mean the school's going to do everything, right? Doesn't mean you won't have to advocate with firmness, but you can shift the way things are sort of set in play for your child from the beginning. And sometimes it is going to be very uncomfortable. And sometimes you're not going to get what your child needs. And then having a plan for what that can look like if your child's not getting what they need is something that you need to think about as a parent. My goal, of course, is for all children to get what they need in the classroom setting. And, my standards are here, no exceptions. I just can't lower my standards. I understand that schools don't have everything, but I do think that we have accessibility to lots of things online, and there is no excuse for anyone to not think outside the box, find a way to make it work for a kiddo. And all of you here, I can see the folks who are participating. uh, you know how I feel about, you just have to figure out how to make it work, right? And that really comes from the teachers, the educators wanting to do it. And even if we know they might not want to do it, from a parent perspective, you just have to come in with your non-negotiables, come in with what it is that you think is necessary for your child, and build that relationship, and just try to make it work. I know it's not easy. Believe me, I know it's not easy. So I wanted to just start with that in terms of parents have to first realize that accepting an autism diagnosis or classification with the school means you have to accept that your child's educational setting might look different, right, than what you expected when they started kindergarten or before you had your kiddos, or whatever our expectations are. And to understand that it's not that you are giving up on your child, it's not that you are lowering your expectations for your child. It is, you're just providing what they need. It's really that simple. I know I keep saying that. To me, it sounds very simple. Just provide them with what they need. Whether that's 5 kids in a classroom, whether that is, one-on-one, which I'm not a fan of, but I do know there are some children, very, very rare occasions, that really have such high auditory sensitivities that being in a classroom setting, even small setting, doesn't work for them. And so one-on-one homeschool may be the option, or one-on-one in a classroom, but that's not something that is available in most places. So thinking in terms of, you have to think about what your child needs to set them up for success, because you can always build on academics. Remember, the communication, the sensory is the foundation. You can build on academics when all of that other stuff comes into play. But if we think about placing our children in a classroom because we want inclusive setting, right? Or we want our children to not be isolated. We have to look at it in terms of, what does my child really need? And not think of it as they're being excluded, but what is it that they need to be successful? And in the long run, that pays off. There are a lot of kids sitting in an inclusive setting, not getting what they need. But everybody's happy, it makes them feel good. Yay, look, we have 90% full inclusion. But nobody's looking at the child and whether or not they're actually learning. I know they're learning, but are they able to show us what they know, right? And yes, there may be some struggles with learning. That's for most kids, all kids, outside of even a diagnosis. So just remembering that and thinking of that. And then the flip side of that, of course, is the education perspective, right? And that's the part that when I participate in an IEP meeting, any of you who have worked with me, where we have sort of planned for an IEP, one of the things that I try really hard to do is just to balance what I know schools can do and what they have available and what parents want. Of course, we all want 100% perfection, right? But that's not available anywhere. So we have to come up with our non-negotiables. And that's important. What are the things that I'm not willing to give up and I really want for my child? But also, if the school is not able to provide that, how can I work with the school, support the school to see if we can get that in place, right? And that looks different for every scenario. And the reason that I try to do the balance is because, number one, your child is attending school and people are in charge of teaching and taking care of your child out of your sight. So we want to try to build those relationships. And unfortunately, from the school perspective, I don't agree with this, but from the school perspective, when parents come in and have questions or recommendations or want to be contributing part of the IEP committee, schools sort of get really defensive. And that saddens me because that's not what I did. That's not what my colleagues did when I worked as a speech therapist. We always wanted the parents involved. I don't know what has happened, and I don't have a lot of time to spend trying to figure that out. So I'm spending time trying to help anyone and everyone, but specifically my parents and educators who want to listen, to figure out how we can balance what resources we have, what a child needs, and how parents and schools can work together. The struggle is from the educator perspective, teachers have a lot of pressure for test scores. That's not fair, right? But it's the reality. It's the reality. So a lot of times they're coming from a place of, I just need to worry about test scores because I need to keep my job because I have a mortgage. Now, you all know how I feel about that. That is not the burden of the parent. You should not have that told to you. It should not be something you need to worry about. I'm just here to help give that education acceptance component from the educator perspective. With that said, in terms of the teacher has her own concerns, and in the IEP meeting that prevented me, I don't want to say, it was a really good meeting. It was a good meeting. It was just a lot. It was just a lot. And, one of the things that I sort of shared with the parents is, I don't think the teacher is intentionally trying to not have your child in their classroom. I think the teacher is probably thinking, they're not going to get me a paraeducator. They're not going to support me, and I'm not going to be able to meet this child's needs because I've not had training. Now, no excuses, right? So what can you do about that as an educator? However, that is the perspective of a lot of educators. They know that they're not going to be supported, or sometimes they just don't know what to do. And shamefully, for whatever reason, they're not able to just say, I just don't know. I think in the meeting that we had this previous week, finally, I think it was the speech therapist just said, we live in a small town and we just don't have any resources and we don't have training. I can work with that. Right? I can't work with the taking on your own needs as an educator to stifle the needs of a student. I understand the dynamic. However, it's just not something that I will accept because we're adults and we just need to figure out and just do the extra work, whatever that looks like. So from the school perspective, in regards to acceptance, right? I talked about the parents and sort of what that looks like for schools. I think if schools would just take one day, 1 hour to listen to an actual autistic person, it would make a mindset shift. If schools are at least accepting of the fact that an autistic individual is not a behavior disordered child, is not a child not complying, but it's a child that sees the world differently, processes information differently, and how can we as educators provide what that child needs and support their needs so that they can show us what they know. So part of the acceptance from educators needs to come with getting rid of the behavior component. And I really, really hope this changes, as my grandma says, before I close my eyes, because we have got to shift that perspective of behavior, behavior, behavior. And you all have heard Torrin speak. If you think about the fact that someone is working very hard to communicate, needs visual supports, needs that sensory input, and we are not providing that in the school and in the classroom because we have not accepted that these things are necessary because we only see behaviors, behaviors, behaviors. That is going to that's just going to prevent kids from being successful, and it's just going to frustrate everyone. So the big shift that needs to come from the educator standpoint is we've got to stop talking about the deficit in the behavior. We have to stop. That whole statement in an IEP that says child does not socialize or play with others. Okay, I don't understand that, right? As an educator, you have a student, it clearly states that they have an autism diagnosis, you have paperwork, you are at an IEP meeting with it written in the IEP that it is an autistic student, yet you are going to make a comment and say they are not socializing and playing with peers. Instead of saying, this is a child that needs support with communication so that they can ask to play, so that they can sort of interject themselves in the turn taking of whatever game that kiddos are playing at recess. That's the shift that needs to be taken place, not the burden put on the child that they need to fix their behavior and they need to play with other kids and they need to learn turn taking skills. We have to set it up for them to be successful. And we can only do that if we, as educators, and I'm saying we because I am an educator, even though I think I have autism acceptance down, but we as educators need to stop looking at behaviors. I've just really had it up to here with the whole behavior thing. I mean, I really am just tired of hearing, he doesn't sit. And, perfect example, one of the comments or the pushback during this meeting was about trying to convince the parents that the child was not ready for kindergarten. I don't know what ready for kindergarten is. I mean, I've been teaching and working in education for 35 years. Never, ever have I ever said, oh, this child can't go to kindergarten without a diagnosis. And we're looking for kindergarten readiness. No, everybody goes to kindergarten at 5. I'm not saying that every child needs to be placed in the general education classroom, but the purpose of kindergarten is to learn the things that we do in the classroom, to learn the culture of class, which is taking turns, standing in line, sitting at your desk, right? Hopefully with alternative seating. So when schools are looking for children to come to school having all the skills, that's not accepting difference. That's not accepting autism, especially when you're sitting in an IEP meeting making an individualized education plan. In fact, I'm not even using the term IEP anymore because I think that everyone has forgotten that an IEP is an individualized education plan, not sit in gen ed and do it like everybody else. That's not what we have an IEP for. And I think we've forgotten that. And I put some fault on, the push for inclusion. And for some reason that seems to be this like, oh, if we put them in an inclusive setting, then, all is going to be right and they will appear neurotypical or whatever it is that everyone's thinking. And the minute that a child gets out of their chair, all of a sudden it's a behavior problem. So that acceptance from the educator's standpoint has to come from understanding what autism is, making sure we're setting students up for success, and being open to the fact that if a child has visual supports, if a child needs something written beforehand or something to take home to prep for a test or an activity the next day, that is not cheating. That's not unfair. Or, a sensory fidget, right? This whole thing with educators not accepting the fact that one child needs a fidget, the other child does not, right? It's not fair. It's not fair. All the other children will want it. No, they don't. They really don't. And I have been in several, I don't even know how many classrooms I've been into in the last 35 years. I have never given a fidget or alternative seating to a child, and then another child says, oh, I want that too, because they don't need it. I wear glasses, some kids wear glasses. Other kids don't say, oh, I want glasses too, because they don't need glasses, right? Some kids may say, I want to wear glasses because it looks fun and cute. But generally, children really are, especially young children, they're kind of caught up in their own selves. So they really are not really concerned about Bobby's alternative seating or Mary's fidget. So thinking in terms of educators need to accept that it's okay for accommodations, modifications to be provided, and that doesn't mean children are not, doesn't mean we're just like giving them stuff for free. I don't even know how else to say it because it's really a concept that I don't understand. I really don't understand. You have a child with a diagnosis, with a classification, you're sitting in an IEP meeting, or you know they have an IEP, just do what you are supposed to do to meet the child's needs. And I do understand that part of the struggle for educators is lack of training, but we have the internet, so not really taking that excuse anymore. And I also understand that it is very hard to see the disability, right? You don't see the neurodiversity. You don't see the taking time to process. You don't see the work that it takes to formulate a sentence, respond in a timely manner, and come up with something, an answer, and formulate all of that at the same time. I get it, but this is 2021. We really should be doing better or trying to understand. And so just because you can't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist, especially when we have a piece of paper that tells you that it does. All right, nobody says that the child with cerebral palsy in the wheelchair needs to figure out how to make it work so they don't look different in the classroom. No, they cannot navigate the school unless they have their wheelchair, right? Because they're not quite capable at the time of walking around the school. Maybe they can walk, but they need support throughout the day. All right, the next part that I sort of wanted to talk about in regards to accepting autism within the educational setting is all about the accommodations. The accommodations are important, and what needs to be understood is accommodations are there to support the child. That doesn't mean if they can do it on a particular day without needing that accommodation that, oh, see, they don't need it. Maybe they need it Monday, Wednesday, Friday, but they don't need it on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And maybe they need it Monday, Wednesday, and Friday because on those sort of nights before, or maybe the day before, they have a lot of therapy sessions. And so they're really, really just processing so much information from the day before, the night before, after school activities, or maybe there are just, things that go on in the home that they have to process. And so the next day, they really need that accommodation, right? They need more visuals in place. They need and rely on their visual schedule. And I'll just talk about the visuals. That's one of my biggest sort of like frustrating points in terms of educators and parents accepting accommodations are sometimes necessary. And that doesn't mean your child or the student is lesser than. It just means they need support to show us what they know. And so when it comes to visual schedules, when it comes to visual supports, the reason we have them is so that if a child needs them, they can rely on them, right? And the days that they don't need them. And you all have all heard me talk about, we use our GPS, we use our calendar, we have reminders. We all use visual supports. And I always go back to the stop sign. We know we have to stop at the corner, but that visual stop sign is a reminder because one day we may be distracted and we're rushing one or the other, and that reminds us to stop. I mean, it's really that simple. And using visual supports does not mean a person cannot grow up to be independent, right? A lot of times I get teachers to say, well, I mean, are they gonna have to use that for the rest of their lives? Do we say that about somebody who has a hearing impairment? We can't start them on a hearing aid because then they're going to have to use a hearing aid the rest of their life, right? We don't say that. And you guys can tell, right? How I'm just like super, very, very passionate about this because I'm frankly just tired. I'm just tired of educators and parents, not including any of you, but I'm tired of the lack of understanding, the lack of acceptance in terms of when you have an IEP that you are working on, when you know that a child has a diagnosis, you have to accept that we have to sometimes provide a different placement and we have to give those accommodations. And accommodations are not lesser than, like, it's not going to prevent someone from doing something independently. I understand, oh, I want them to do it on their own. What does that mean? What does doing it on your own mean? I go to the grocery store, I have a list, right? I'm a competent adult that knows how to go to the grocery store. I know we need toilet paper. I know that we need probably coffee and sugar because that is consumed on a regular basis. I need a list. If I don't have the list, I don't come home with the right items. That doesn't prevent me from becoming or independently taking care of household needs, right? The list is a support that I need. We just have to remember that our kiddos need visuals, lists, words, whatever that looks like for that child to support them so they can navigate their school setting independently. It's really that simple. The other thing I want to talk about in regards to accepting autism when it comes to accommodations. Handwriting is overrated in this day and time. Job applications are online. Everything requires keyboarding skills. I am not saying that children don't need to learn how to write their name and write a sentence. I am saying that we need to stop pushing for constantly working on handwriting skills and not addressing that we can accommodate that when a child has fine motor, hand strength, shoulder stability, still working on midline crossing. All of that needs to be considered, that if they're not quite able to do that, what can we do to accommodate so that they can show us what they know? And technology is wonderful. So we have to accept that sometimes it may look different, and that's okay, right? Use Snap, what is it? Snap Type. Use that. Let children type what they need to type. No different than communication. And that brings me to communication, which is the final topic in regards to accommodations. Children, students in the classroom setting have a human right to have access to the communication method that they use. If they use PECs, that needs to be with them at all times. Figure it out as an educator, figure it out as a parent to accommodate so that your child has what they need to communicate their needs and wants. It should not be just when the teacher decides they need to say something or answer a question and then they give them their AAC device or their PECs. I don't even know what that means. Everyone has a right to have access to the way they communicate. If they're building communication skills, which most of our kiddos are, make sure you're working on that. Make sure you provide backup, right? That may look like an AAC device for kiddos who are verbal, but efficient responses prevent them from participating in the classroom. Let them type it, let them write it, let them use their AAC device. Think about incorporating an AAC device. An AAC device is not, and when I say device, I'm always thinking application, right? Application for a phone, application for a tablet, not that big chunky thing that we used to have a long time ago. It is so important to remember that the communication is the challenge, right? It's not a behavior disorder. It's the processing and the communication. So verbal communicators can also benefit from backup technology applications or AAC devices, right? You've seen it on social media. We're now starting to get that information, right? And when I say now I'm saying that we're talking about that, right? And I have a couple of parents in here who know that scenario and understand that scenario. But it is important to understand accepting autism in the classroom setting means accepting communication to and from the child may have to be accommodated, adjusted, but definitely provided in a way that it works for the individual needs of the child. It's really just that simple. It really is that simple. So